Hey guys, I'm Donnie Godsey. I want to talk to you about complex grief. We have just gone through the 5 stages of grief and how to resolve them. Well, how do you help someone with complex grief? And there's all kinds of situations where you can have complex grief. PTSD is a complex grief issue. Losing someone to suicide is a complex grief issue. You can have complex grief show up in a number of different areas. And one of the characteristics of complex grief is that it's got various grief sources all mixed in. And so it makes it rather hard to track on where this particular emotion or this mindset's coming from. Because if it's coming from this one, it may look like one particular stage of grief, and here's another grief issue that got resolved to a point, now it's in this stage of grief, and it kind of flows into each other and just makes a muddled mess. What I'm excited to present, though, is I feel like God's given me a way of looking at it that simplifies it all. It's pretty awesome. Let's pretend for a minute that we're looking at a large rectangular pool, and it's perfectly calm. There's nothing that's disturbing the water. And then we take a rock of a certain size. It could be a little rock, big rock, whatever, but depending upon the size of the rock, it will do something interesting. If we toss it into the water, it's gonna make what? Makes ripples, right? The number of ripples, the size of the ripples, the frequency in between each ripple, there's all things that you can measure. And it's easy to do when it's just one rock going in there. Bloop. Well, picture instead of a rock going into the water, it's this thing that's kind of bobbing up and down in the water, putting off a constant signal. And for this example, we'll say that that's a grief event. And it's putting off a certain signal of grief. And that signal of grief is one of those stages of grief that it may be denial, maybe anger, maybe bargaining, maybe depression, it may be some form of acceptance, whether it's false acceptance or some kind of real acceptance. But anyway, it's putting off this grief signal, and it can change. It can change over time, going from denial to hop over to anger or back and forth or whatever, but that grief event is putting off a certain signal. With complex grief, what you have is not just one grief event in that pool, but you got several. So let's picture multiple splashes going on. And what's interesting about that, when you toss in 3 or 4 objects or whatever, they're going to put off their little ripples too. And it's harder to see it as a trackable thing at this point because it's got so many going on. If you had 2 rocks tossed in there, they're putting off their little signal, their little frequency of ripples. And wherever they intersect, the highs are higher and the lows are lower, right? So wherever the painful childhood that's being grieved intersects with this other loss over here, the highs are higher and the lows are lower. There's a greater amplitude going on because they've mixed into each other, right? And so if you got this grief source and this grief source and this grief source and another one over here, they're all putting off certain signals. If you were to look at the pool, like in this diagram, it looks like total chaos going on right here, when in fact, it's not. It's all measurable. It's all trackable, but it doesn't look that way. And what I'm here to tell you is, as you allow the Lord to speak to these different grief signals, these different grief events, He can clear this one up, and then you can see much more clearly these other things, and you can clear this one up. I just want you to know that if you could take these different grief events that are all muddied into this, and frankly, that's how most of us are, if you were able to separate them out, you could see them very clearly. It's when they're all jammed together, it makes it harder to help someone with, because in one minute they're in denial, and in another minute they're in anger, or it's really bouncing around all over the place. But the Lord can sort it out. He can show you what's the right question to ask this other person, or ask yourself if you're the one going through it. Let Him speak to it. Let him resolve this thing. Sometimes some of the grief that we engage in, like let's say we add an addiction on top of this, it kind of works as a smoke screen to this other stuff that's going on. And sometimes people are having a hard time letting go of this other secondary issue because it's covering all this other painful stuff. And I'll tell clients I'm working with that, sometimes it's harder to let go of this because these other things come into crystal clarity at that point. And so if I'm working with someone with addiction, I'll let them know that though this is a complex grief issue, when we resolve this one area, use the momentum, use the trust with the process and with the Lord to start knocking out these other things too, because you can do it. You don't have to keep this smoke screen in place. You can ask Lord, Lord, do I need this in my life because of this? Can we resolve this other issue? And it's powerful, it's awesome. So guys, this picture helps illustrate what's really happening in complex grief. And I'm telling you, if you're patient with the Lord, He can walk you through these different elements, these different things that are happening. And especially if you understand that, okay, I'm feeling anger. What am I angry about? What am I grieving? What did I lose? Lord, is it coming from here? Is it coming from here? And you can start to work this out with Him. And use those 5 stages of grief. And don't be afraid to go into these complex grief situations with the Lord, because He absolutely can walk you through it and walk the other person through it. It's amazing. I've seen God just do miracles with this stuff. So I use this pool illustration to help people understand what's going on in their lives. That yeah, it feels like it's total chaos, but it's really not. And that this anger is coming from over here, or this denial is coming from over there. And if you take the time to separate it out, you can beat it. You can beat all of it with the Lord. He's got the answers you need. We guess, He knows. It's time to ask Him good strategic questions, and He can walk you out of all that mess. I love you. God bless you. If you need more help, check it out with the groups. Check it out with the one-on-one care. We believe in you. God does too, and He's right there with you.